Welcome to Sharing Hope. My name is Jamie George. Our guest is Stephen Mansfield. Stephen is a New York Times best-selling author and popular speaker who also leads a media training firm based in Washington, D.C. He first rose to global attention with his New York Times best-selling book, The Faith of George W. Bush. And from there, he just kept on writing biographies, cultural studies. It's now, I think, something like 30-plus books that Stephen's written. He speaks in the U.S. and abroad, and especially in support of the Kurdish people. There's a lot of beautiful stories. Stephen's been very involved in that culture and in some pretty significant ways. He's also become an outspoken advocate for the cause of noble manhood. And my sons are beneficiaries of his writing on that. We had a conversation recently. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, man. Great to be with you.
Yeah, my boys, I'd gotten one of your books. I think it was when we were hanging out at Dave's. And so I took one of the books home or whatever. And I don't know if I left it somewhere or something, but one of my sons picked it up and they were like, dang, I got some work to do.
That's great. That's how I feel every day. So that's great.
I've got twin 24-year-old boys, but I love that. And there's so much to talk about. But since we're there, jump into that a little bit. Talk about your passion for kind of young men in particular, stepping into the role of leadership and becoming men.
Yeah, years ago, I got real concerned about what I was seeing with young men. It wasn't so much what they were doing, but more what society with its mixed messages was sort of doing to them. I spent a lot of time on college campuses. I lecture. Late at night, I'd rather be with the students than the faculty. I'd rather be hanging out at the campus pizza joint. And young guys would just say, hey, I didn't have a father in the home. I've never had a model. Tell me what to do. What does it mean to be a man? Because everybody's saying, be a man, be a man, be a man. So I just started paying attention to what they were asking, started spending time with them, and that's led to what I do now. And so, the society, I'm not blaming the culture or society, but it pushes all kinds of pleasures, all kinds of luxuries, all kinds of strip clubs and, what have you on men. And so that if you're watching the movies, that can seem to be the meaning of manhood. But ultimately, we all know that's unfulfilling. And that then leads to, of course, to the abuse and Me Too moment culture, which men need to be aware of. So I wanted to help guys navigate a wise path, a happy path. And so I've written about 3 books now, do a lot of speaking, starting a lot of programs, probably going to buy a facility eventually and see if we can do some good. I want to spend a lot of my life trying to help men be good and noble men, but also fulfilled men.
Man, I love that. I read a book a couple of years ago. I think it was by a female journalist called Manning Up. I don't know if that came across here. Yeah, yes. And it was fascinating listening to a woman say, hey, ladies, while we are looking to be empowered, we have to be careful of the message we're sending to men, because she was saying, if we send the message, we don't need you. Like, I don't need you for anything. Then do you understand? They're going to sit around, eat pizza, play video games, and show up later on in life and want to marry someone 10 years younger. And the next thing you know, where are all the men? It was a fascinating read by a lady saying, we've got to be careful with the message we're sending to young men.
Yeah, exactly. I call the prevailing view on the university campuses and so on the Guerrilla Theory of Men. Mm-hmm. And it's the idea that we needed men when they needed to tame the frontier and tote the barge and lift the bale and raise the steel and lay the tracks and all that kind of stuff. But supposedly in an information age, men don't have the aptitude for it. Men aren't capable of doing it. So women are rising, which I celebrate. I'm the father of a 30-year-old daughter. I want her to be the Pope, the King, the President, the CEO, everything she can be. Break every glass ceiling in the world.
Yeah.
But men are in decline by every measurable standard. And so I call it the Guerrilla Theory of Men. Men are in the corner of their cage, scratching themselves, eating a banana, wondering how the world passed them by. And because young boys don't have any men to initiate them into a noble culture of men, then they're lost, they're rootless. And boys today, especially in the public schools, all schools, are just in total downward spiral. In fact, I can gross you out just for a moment by telling you that one of the rising surgeries for young men is a thing called gynecomastia. And it's to correct gynecomastia. And gynecomastia is what happens to a young boy when he's over-medicated, when he lives a sedentary lifestyle, when he's obese, and it also has something to do with video games. And he actually can begin to grow breast material. So I have surgeons advising me in this man movement that I'm involved in, and some of them have actually removed what they say would be the perfect American set of breasts, except from a 16-year-old boy who's been humiliated by it.
Wow.
So if you're looking for a statement of what can happen to a young boy who's not, led and fathered and what have you, That really is it, medically speaking. So anyway, you asked why I'm motivated for what I do, and that's it. Plus, it's, by the way, a whole lot of fun. If I have a choice between speaking to the military or speaking to a church, much as I love it all, give me a room full of screaming crazy guys who are going to go eat some meat afterwards. That's what I
So I worked with teenagers for about 13 years, and one of the things that struck me was, and I think you speak to this, and I'd like elaborate if you would. I was struck by, in my early studies, the absence of a rite of passage for men in Western culture.
Yes.
And to the point that we kind of manufactured a thing where we tried to create kind of our own crucible to put young men through, just at least so they had a mark in their mind of the transition from boyhood to manhood. In our own family, we did it when the kids could drive, because we're like, you now have a weapon. This is we call it a vehicle, but it's weaponized. You have to learn to be responsible. Have you stumbled across any of that? And have you written at all about the idea of a rite of passage? It happens in so many other cultures, but we've missed it seems, here.
Yeah, I believe in it passionately. There's that great African proverb that comes out of the villages. If we do not initiate the boys, they will burn the village down just to feel its warmth. I've always thought that was a great phrase.
I've never heard that. Man, that is good.
And I actually start my book, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, with a story about me at about the age of 30, being in the Muslim world where I've spent a lot of time and done a lot of work. And a bunch of Muslim men found out that I was a father, and they initiated me as though I was just recently a father. My son was actually about 10, 12 years old, and changed my name. That's what happens in the Arab world. They change the name of a new father, to honor him. So I'm Abu John, father of Jonathan. And it transformed me. And I came back and said, why don't we have those rituals? Why don't we have those things? Our Jewish friends have got the bar mitzvah, where they make a young man a son of a covenant. But the rest of us, we don't tend to have those things. And so I talked about the importance of, having rituals and giving gifts and bringing them into the culture of men and all of that. And I'm encouraging it as much as I can. In fact, my most recent book, and I'm not just trying to sell books, is called Men on Fire. And at the end, I say, do a ritual for this. Light 7, it's about 7 fires that ought to burn in the soul of a man. So I say, light 7 fires in a field or a backyard, and initiate the boys, and sacrifice an animal and eat something good on the grill, and mark the moment. This is important that we don't have those things. I was changed by being sort of initiated by those Muslim men, and I was in my early 30s, for heaven's sakes.
Wow.
So what would have happened if that had happened at about 13, when our Jewish friends do it? So anyway, I couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more.
One of the things I love our conversations, because you have this intuition and this knack for sociology. I feel like you work hard at it, but it just seems so natural to you. You tend to see patterns that are at play, patterns that are coming. I know we're in the middle of it now. We're in Nashville. It's the quarantine. The ban is just beginning to lift, etc. But as you consider this time, have you started, knowing you, I'm assuming you have at some level, but have you started to think, how are we going to look back at this season I was going to say the American experience, but this global experience. Have you already given some thought to how we might be different because of this global pandemic?
Yeah, I think we will be different. And your question is very interesting, because as a historian, I'm always considering how we look back on things. And I'm always urging people to consider, how will you want to be remembered, or how will you want to have behaved when you look back on it?
Yes.
I think the answer to that question is very diverse. Obviously, some people will look back on this as the great dissolution. It's when a crisis came and our government failed us. Some people will say that. Some people will blame religious types for not believing science, et cetera, et cetera. Some will blame China. But it's interesting, because this is the main question I ask myself. It's the way I orient myself in a crisis, and that is, how will we be remembered? And how will I have conducted myself? Will I be proud of the way I conducted myself? Will it resonate to the next generation, and so on? And I have to say that at a cultural level, that's unwritten yet. That's actually what bothers us, I think. By this time in World War II, you had a national consensus. You had a president sounding a clear trumpet. You knew who the enemy was. It was clear.
Even though the uncertainty of who was going to win was out there, there was at least a path ahead.
No question. In fact, the jury was out. The historical jury was out as to whether we would win.
Right, right.
We were very weak. We were coming out of a depression. We had reacted to World War I by not arming up like we needed to do in that competitive world.
And we forget that all of Europe was pretty much already Germany's, right?
All of Europe was Nazi for the most part, and they had proven themselves unstoppable. We were pretty sure that it was going to be the German Republic of London or what have you. We had just had our backsides whooped in Hawaii. I mean, it was embarrassing the way the Japanese had snuck up on us and then bombed us into the Stone Age in Hawaii. So there was every reason to believe that we were actually in threat of annihilation. But if I had to trade where we are now for the unity, the consensus, I would even say the faith in our institutions and the leadership at the national level that we had then, I would. So that's that. It's not that I'm not playing politics as I say that. I'm saying it's about the fraying that we're dealing with. So I'm not a pessimist. I think good things are coming. I think good days are coming. I think we'll reclaim ground. You're right. Things are opening up. It's going to happen regionally. And I think we'll be back. I think by Christmas, we won't be perfect, but we'll be raising a glass and thanking God for his grace and during this time. However, I do think the jury is out as to what we remember from this time. And hopefully we remember that we had a great many failures, but we then responded as a country and made the country better. That's what I hope.
Yeah. See, because when you describe that era of World War II, and I'm not the historian you are, but I certainly am an amateur, and I'm grateful for the time I've spent with the older generations, listening to them tell stories. And I'm thinking about my grandmother talking about the collecting all the medals and having the different drives. And there was you only got butter on a certain day. Like there was a sense of solidarity throughout the nation, which it seems like we matched initially.
Yes.
Okay, we'll stay inside. Like we'll take one for the team. Like there was this, but now that, as you talked about, regionally, everybody's coming out differently. There's this new friction in it all. Do you think we're gonna will that be resolved? I mean, talk about that.
I absolutely believe that it will. And in time, with greater facts. Part of it is that everything was new. A tank and a machine gun was known in 1941. We knew how to deal with that. We knew how to deal with a battleship. Here, we've got a bunch of things invisible to us. And then we've got the divided experts. And that's really death to a culture. If I was in D.C., as I sometimes am, but not now, advising all the medicos, I'd say, look, don't lie to us. But don't just let your disagreements be public. Let mom and dad go in the bedroom and work it out and come back and present unity to the children. Because it's the fact that we've got one group of quote unquote experts calling other groups of quote unquote experts false or liars or conspirators. Well, I'm not an MD. I'm a pretty well educated man, but I don't have much medical background. Math is not my language. So what am I supposed to believe? It's kind of like back during Y2K. People laugh now at Y2K and the fact that the computers, we thought the computers weren't going to work when 2000 rolled over. Right. But it was because the experts were looking at us and going, oh, I don't know what's going to work. Right. So that's the kind of stuff that's causing disunity. As we gain facts, as we learn more about what would have happened, well, you know what, really, we should have sheltered everybody over 65 and those with cardiopulmonary problems or whatever.
Right.
Then we'd be better off. So as time goes forward, there will be a greater consensus. But part of the problem with our divided country, the partisan media, et cetera, is that as I sit here right now, I'm still not sure of the facts. And I'm a guy who works in D.C., reads a lot, got a doctorate in another field. I'm not stupid. I still can't tell you if the numbers we're seeing are accurate. And then, of course, what explains the fact that you and I are sitting in Nashville, the death rate, grievous though it is in Tennessee, is about 300.
Yeah.
Which had that been the whole country, we wouldn't even have responded.
Right.
Whereas, of course, my daughter lives in New York. She hasn't left her apartment in about 3 months because that's ground zero.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, we will have consensus eventually, but it will be the level of consensus we had initially during World War II, and that's part of our problem now. There's just too much uncertainty.
Yeah, well said. And that's hopeful too. Thank you for that, Stephen. So personally, how have you survived or thrived in a worldwide pandemic? What's it been like for you the last couple of months?
Well, it's actually been really, really good. I spent the first 2 weeks traveling because that was scheduled for me. And as some churches began to shut down, they asked me to do their Easter services. So I would fly into their studios and do them. And then I got home and my wife and I have sat still. I'll tell you, there are a couple of things that have really helped me during this time. First of all, my wife and I have a rich life together. So whether it's reading books, playing cards, cooking new things, she is a gourmet cook and almost a sommelier. So the pairing of the wine and all that stuff is real important in our home to her. And of course, I'm the beneficiary. And then, of course, just whatever, learning new body weight exercises and going for long walks. And we could be sheltered together for 6 months and we would be fine. We'd miss our children, but I'm saying we have a rich life. The other thing is that I have a basic response to hardship that is conditioned by some ancient words, and it is endure hardship as discipline. You know, of course, that comes from Hebrews 12. Endure hardship as discipline. So when hardship comes my way, I'm not saying I'm always happy about it. I'm not saying I'm laughing uproariously the first day, but I do start to think, how can I be made better by this? Now, please don't misunderstand. I'm not assuming the whole global pandemic is about Stephen having his character improved. But in terms of my little experience of this, what does this make possible? What am I being taught? What can I learn from this?
Because this is the thing you have control over. This
Exactly.
is your domain.
Right.
Instead of being lost in what you can't control, this is what you can give attention to.
Right. So I have worked on body weight exercises. I have improved certain skills. I have asked myself, wow, when this thing hit, what was great about my level of preparedness in life and all that? What wasn't? So for example, Bev and I have worked real hard on all kinds of should I die kinds of things regarding our insurance and money. But I realized there was something about my funeral I hadn't paid. And I'm a big believer in men, especially making sure that their families aren't burdened with all that afterwards. So I made a note. My workouts, as much as I travel in hotels by myself, my workout relied on the Y across the street being open. I live across the street from the downtown Y in Nashville. Well, now I got to learn body weight exercises. Now I got to study them. Which ones work? Which ones don't? I'm actually in some ways in better shape now than I was 2 months ago. And it's because, and I worked out right here in this office behind me in the carpeted space, push-ups, sit-ups, planks, all the stuff, all the words we know, squats, all that stuff. I've learned to do that to the point of breathless exhaustion. I'm not sure. I'm not going to quit the Y when this is over because I think I'm better off doing it. So it's an attitude that says, how can I be made better? What might, call it what you will at whatever level, wherever your faith is, God, the universe, your circumstances, what's it handing to you to have to master? That's what I got on.
Can I say that again? Now I want to lock that in. What is it handing to you, or what is God handing to you that you get to or have to master? Yeah.
In my case, I would think in terms of God. If I live through something, I believe it's because it's ordained in some way. And so what's the point? To put it humorously, what do you want me to learn? How can I endure hardship as discipline? So I want to be made better on the other side. So when I look back, to use our initial discussion, when I look back on Stephen Mansfield during these 2 or 3 months of being, quarantined, I want to say, well, I maximized that time. I loved my family and kids well. I checked in on my friends, but I also improved. I read, I worked out, I improved my skills. I got better at Zoom or whatever at a practical level. I fixed stuff in the home. In other words, I maximized that time and improved my life and the lives of others and lived in a way that I'm proud of 10 years later. That's how I think. The historian in me is always playing a movie 10 years later.
Yeah.
So what is it? So that helps me and that keeps me. Yeah, I've done my binge watching and enjoy some new food, but what I'm not is Jabba the Hutt stuck on the couch. What I'm not is, drinking 5 bottles of whiskey a day. What I'm not is, 50 pounds heavier and 10 IQ points dumber and with tension and strife with my wife because we're wearing on each other. That's not happening in my life. And it's because of a basic attitude from the very beginning.
You're also really good, and you have been since I've known you, the way you set your intent and you set the frame for reality at dealing with fear. That's one of the things I've appreciated about you for a guy who works in and out of DC, who's well aware of a lot of the things going on at a national level. You're able to process fear. And it's interesting to me because before the global pandemic, a lot of the conversations that happen have to do with, it hasn't been about germs. It's been much more about the military. It's been much more about, and in particular, a group that you work with, hey, what about these Muslims? What about what's going to happen with that in Afghanistan? There's a lot of misinformation. Our mutual friend, Josh Graves, who does a lot with the Muslims, just not too far from where I am right here. There's a lot of misinformation about what it's like to deal with other ethnic groups. Can you talk a little bit about what you've learned about Muslims in your time with the Kurds and how you work through fear that might be even misappropriated?
Yeah. It's a great question. First of all, I had to learn to conquer fear to even go into the Muslim world as much as I have. I'm often there alone. I've been in war zones. And so I had to conquer my own fear. And what I had to do was zoom out and say, what's the worst that can happen? What's the big picture negative? Because I have found that while fear is not necessarily an illusion, it is a liar. You are not an illusion. You are a real person on this call. Right. But you could be lying to me, right? You could tell me right now you're in Moscow, and I wouldn't know any different. Right. So you're not an illusion, but you could be lying. And that's what fear is. Fear is not an illusion. In other words, fear is not necessarily always unwarranted, but it does lie, it does exaggerate, it does misdirect. So I would always push through the fog of fear, trying to get to whatever the facts were. And the facts normally settled me. There might still be some concerns, there might still be some danger or some threat, but I was able to get down to reality and find a fear level at 2 rather than 20. But the other thing about working in the Muslim world is that you're sort of dealing with a culture that is freaked out about you. This is, if I'm ever asked to take a role of diplomacy with the U.S., this is the thing that I'll emphasize. The statesmen I work with in the Middle East, the people I work with, they are nervous about Americans. They are nervous about us. They're not fomenting anything horrible. They're terrified. And when our president, and again, I'm not playing politics, when our president gets up one morning and suddenly yanks American troops from protecting the Kurds, I was on the ground, by the way, in Iraq at that time. And I had to do a lot of their major media explaining and apologizing for U.S. policy. Is this a preparation for abandoning the Middle East? Has the U.S. turned away from the Kurds? Why do the Americans now hate us when we were their allies just months ago? I was answering those questions on
Wow, Stephen. Oh, good heavens.
So all of that to say, what you're dealing with there is fear of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see the illusion factor.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about getting picked off by some ISIS person. The Kurds intend to protect me. They're freaked out about who I represent or who they think I represent because I'm an American. And they assume every American visits the White House every other morning. So my point is that fear is an exaggerator. It's a false mirror. And you want fear to operate in your life because it gives you respect for reality. I could fall down those stairs. I could burn myself if I'm unwise. I could cut my finger when I'm slicing the onions. I'm not going to be debilitated by that fear, but I am going to consider it. But the main issue when I'm dealing with the Middle East is that these people want to be our friends. They want to be righteous. Sure, there are radicals like ISIS who want the whole world to burn, but that's not the Middle East. And if I'll calm down, swallow my fears, and hear them, we can get something done. And that's a lot of the way it works.
Does it feel like, and maybe this is cliche, but tell me if this is real. Is it in some ways, is it as simple as literally sitting down face to face, looking someone in the eye, taking time to listen to their story, and letting that breed empathy with inside to go, no, stop with the abstract picture of some person you've put in your mind, make the person real. Sit down with someone, maybe even in your own hometown. Because one of the things we have folks have come into of course, in Nashville in particular, we have a large Kurdish population. But maybe rather than watching the news and having this straw man, like, go downtown and be with somebody. Like, would that be a recommendation on your behalf?
Absolutely. And especially with the Kurds, because the Kurds are internationally known for their hospitality.
Hmm.
They love it when somebody hears them. They love when somebody eats their food. They love when somebody sits and listens to their story. And that's how I'd have to say, I don't, you know me, I am relational, but I'm not an extrovert, and I'm not highly relational. You know what I'm saying? I'm a bit of an introvert, a bit of a thinker, a bit of a reader, and I have to push myself outward to hang with people.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and then I enjoy it. But sitting with the Kurds, listening to their stories, letting them weep. I've actually held their dead. It's not just winning points. It's understanding who they are.
It's changing you from the inside
Yes,
out, isn't
there's
it?
no question. There's no question. I tell my Kurdish friends I would go to the mountains with them, because they have always throughout their history had to go to the mountains. So their best friends go to the mountains with them.
Wow.
And that's not just a phrase.
Wow.
I told my wife if I ever die in Kurdistan, I want to be buried there. And I think she will will actually do that. Bev's got her own thoughts about that. But anyway,
that's a long trip.
Exactly.
Yes, yes.
Exactly. I get serious insurance every time I go. But the point is that the Kurds are people. They have a story. They have a history. They have a culture. And if we just deal with them, and I'm being insulting with my language, if we just deal with them like more ragheads who poured into our country, like the more camel jockeys who poured into our country, that's not even, by the way, true of them. All the bigoted statements that we hear, then of course we're not going to understand them. And I have lost my heart to them, and that's what, if I may say so, makes me effective in being an advocate for them, because I understand them to the extent that any American can understand a Kurdish situation.
Yeah. And if we could just take that, I'm so inspired by that, Stephen. If we could take that, not just with the Kurdish people or a Muslim person, but even the person across the aisle, people who just see the world differently. If we could take time to sit in their stories, wouldn't we all be better off?
There's just no question. I've been in a situation recently. I won't get detailed about it. But a person was being disliked in a room. A person who wasn't in the room was being disliked. And someone said, well, guys, you might want to feel his pain for a little bit. He's a tough customer, and he was insulting, but he's just lost his son. His father committed suicide. He was abused for being black as a child, literally abused and almost hung. This African-American gentleman, who's a friend of mine, had kind of torched the room in an angry moment. And when one guy said, well, you might want to know a little bit of his pain, I got to tell you, everybody in the room who had been angry at him, he was a buddy of mine, changed. Why? Because they knew a bit of his story. And so it's like the great statement from Philo of Alexandria: be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a great battle. And you will understand the battle everybody is fighting for, whatever, against depression, against weight gain, for their financial life, for their marriage, whatever they're fighting for, against racial bigotry. You don't have to. Everybody's got something they're battling.
Yeah.
If we can just touch that part of them, then we won't be as bombastic as we sometimes can be against the unknown.
Man, thank you. Thank you for that, Stephen. This thing has flown by. Gosh, thank you for taking the time. Can we conclude with something you're working on? If folks want to catch up with what's going on with you, where can they find out information and anything that you're doing that you can tell us about?
I appreciate that. StephenMansfield.tv is my website. Mansfield Rites is all my social media, at Mansfield Rites on Twitter, Mansfield Rites, Mansfield Rites. I've just finished a book, and it's out now, just coming out now, called Men on Fire. I mentioned it earlier. It's about the 7 fires that ought to burn in the souls of a man. And I think it's very, very timely. I'll be speaking about that, doing media about that. My world is unusual. I do the man thing, and then I do the sort of political, author of the faith of George W. Bush, author of the faith of Barack Obama vibe. So I speak to politics, speak to the Kurds, and then I speak to men. And for the next months, I'm going to be speaking to men, which makes me happy, because I have to be domestic and in the U.S. I can't fly overseas right now. And I'm really passionate about men who are really being called upon to do a lot, like women are these days. Given the extenuant circumstances of our society. So anyway, it's a privilege. I appreciate you asking. That's what I'm doing, and it's exciting to be part of it.
Beautiful. Well, Stephen, thank you for the time, my friend. And I hope when this whole thing lifts, we can connect soon.
Let's do it, buddy.
All right, brother. Take care. Thanks again.
God bless. Thanks so much.